All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the priorities survey for online learners survey that we conduct in partnership with Ruffalo Noel Levitz. This is a survey that we conduct with the third-party vendor, and it gives us an opportunity to gauge student satisfaction and to benchmark our results against peer institutions across the country. So it's an exciting opportunity for us not only to get some visibility into what our students are thinking and their perceptions of the college and the work that we do, but also how we align to the sector nationally. So I will go ahead and share my screen, and we will jump into it. All right, so the PSOL, or the Priority Survey for Online Learners, is an instrument that's been around for quite some time, and the foundations of the tool is meant to understand how well we're satisfying students' expectations. And so the instrument in total is pretty lengthy, and students actually participate in the survey kind of two times. They go through the survey once, and they're asked to rate items in terms of their level of importance for them as an individual, and then they go through the items again, and they ask them to rate the items in terms of their satisfaction. And then using both of those data points, we can compare their results and understand how well we're meeting their expectations. Are we exceeding expectations? Are we falling short of expectations? And what that performance gap looks like. And that's how we can leverage the strengths and weaknesses that are identified in the survey to understand how well we're performing compared to students' expectations. We use this data in a variety of ways at the college. Um, First and foremost, it's been used heavily in terms of our strategic planning efforts, very much so in terms of our accreditation efforts, especially when we had our most recent HLC visit. Results from the PSOL survey were referenced numerous times throughout our narrative and the argument that we provided to HLC. This helps us very much in terms of our recruitment and retention activities. It helps us to understand what's important to students and what that competitive advantage is for the college in terms of what students' expectations are. We've been administering the PSOL for quite some time. I think the first time that Rio administered the PSOL was way back in 2008. Prior to this year, we've been administering this survey on a 3-year cycle, and that cycle was very much determined by our work in collaboration with the district office and having the survey administered by all the Maricopa colleges simultaneously. The reason for the 3-year cycle is that many of the other campuses utilize a couple of other also nationally normed survey instruments to conduct and receive this similar type of feedback. And so PSOL would come up once every 3 years, hence the 3-year cycle. Moving forward, we're going to be administering the PSOL every other year. So we're going to be transitioning away from what the structure was in the past a little bit, and we'll get data now moving forward from the PSOL every other year. And then on the off years, we'll be getting data from the Community College Survey of Student Engagement, or the CESI. And so then year over year, we'll have repeatable, replicable, and stable data that we can use to compare our performance against our previous trends, but then again, also against those peer comparison groups from across the country. This year, we administered the survey in May of 2022, and it was administered to just over 9,600 students total. We got about an 8% response rate, which is a little bit lower than what we had hoped, but we did get a nice volume of responses at 778 responses total. In comparison to when we administered the survey last in 2019, that's about double the volume of response that we had, but the response rate back in 2019 was a little bit higher because we sampled a little bit differently and had a bit of a smaller initial population that we were targeting. So all that to say, the results likely aren't as representative of the total student population as we would like them to be. However, it does give us a nice volume of responses to latch onto and to dig into so that we can understand students' expectations and priorities. And this next slide will kind of walk us through what the demographics of the response group looks like so that we can understand how generalizable these results might be to our typical student population. So for those of you who are more familiar with the Rio student demographic profile, you might start to see some things that are popping out to you that look a little bit different than what you might be expecting. So in terms of response group demographics, female students were certainly heavily overrepresented in the response group. Our typical split in terms of male-female students tends to be closer to about 60% female and 40% male. With this group, it was a little bit different than that. Similarly, we had a higher representation of some of our students of color in this response group. So Black students especially responded at higher rates than we've seen in the typical student population. And then interestingly, and probably more usefully, when we look at things like student academic load and their academic goal or their academic intent, that's where we can really start to see where the differences from this group correspond to our general student population. So in terms of academic load, whether or not students are enrolled as a full-time student or a part-time student, we have heavy overrepresentation of full-time students. Typically, we have about 10 to 15% full-time students uh, given, depending on the term. With this response group, we had about 37% of the respondents were enrolled in classes at a full-time load. So that's many more than we would typically see. And in terms of student intent or academic goals, it's labeled here about a 50-50 split. So there are about 50% of students who are credential seekers or students who are looking to earn a certificate or a degree with the college versus 48% of those supplemental and transfer students. If you're familiar with our typical student profile, our supplemental student population tends to be much larger than our credential seeking student population, to the tune of about 75%-ish, give or take, tend to be supplemental students or students who aren't necessarily intending to earn a certificate or degree with the college. So what this tells us is that for the students who responded to this instrument, they tended to be more full-time students. They tended to be students who were pursuing a certificate or degree. While that's not necessarily reflective of our typical student population, what it is reflective of is a more traditional student demographic than we might typically interact with at the college. And so I think where that leaves us in the usefulness of this data is that in terms of retention efforts and in terms of making sure that we are having as big of impact as possible, the information that we're receiving from these students would tend to suggest that these are going to be the most bang for our buck. These are students who are enrolling in more courses with us. They're engaging for a potentially longer term commitment with the college because they're going after that certificate of completion or they're going after the associate's degree. And so the attitudes and the perspectives of these students certainly are important for us to understand because these are students who have, more skin in the game, so to speak, with the college. So let's look briefly at some of the mechanics of the survey and how the data are analyzed and the ways in which we get information reported back to us so that we can understand some of the numbers and facts and figures we're going to see later on. So the definitions that you're seeing here are stock language that comes from Ruffalo No Levitz, and they describe how the analysis of the survey helps to quantify what the college's strengths and challenges are and that performance gap that we talked about earlier. So what's the gap between students' level of importance for a particular item versus their level of satisfaction in terms of how we help to serve them. As you read through these, the language is a little dense and it's a little tricky. And so I think a better representation, especially for me as a visual learner, is to look at this in terms of kind of a visual roadmap. And so the institutional strengths are going to be those items that students rated as very important, and they were things that they rated as being highly satisfied with the college. And the challenges are going to be similarly items that were rated as highly important, but students rated them as being highly dissatisfied with the college. And so we want to make sure that we're focusing on the items that tend to be very important for our learners. Knowing the strengths helps us to understand, where our points of pride are and where, we're doing well. And then identifying the challenges help us to really refine what we might take back and consider in terms of planning for the future and improvements that we might want to take part in. So our institutional strengths are the areas, again, where students rated items as being highly important to them and that they were highly satisfied in terms of the offerings from Rio. And as you can see, this list of 7 strengths here are things that probably aren't wildly different than what you would expect. So registration for online courses is convenient. Assignments are clearly identified in the syllabus. faculty are providing timely feedback about student progress in courses. Number 4, you'll see is starts with campus specific. So we do have the ability to insert some custom questions. So this is one of those custom questions, and it talks about learning effectively on my own, which is important for us being an asynchronous online institution primarily. That skill for a student is very important for them to be able to achieve high results here at the college. Students reflected that billing and payment procedures were convenient. They had access to the appropriate technical assistance when they needed it, and that the online resources that were provided were adequate. So these are all things that we know to be strong suits of the college. Many of these items are things that we've seen represented on prior PSOL administrations in the past. And so these are all good things for us that we can kind of latch onto and know that we have a strong offering for our students in these spaces. On the flip side, we have some institutional challenges that give us an opportunity to really dig into some options that we might consider in terms of room for improvement or growth in the near future. And so again, these are items that students rated as highly important, but they were highly dissatisfied in terms of how the college was supporting them in these areas. So these items included things like program requirements being clear and reasonable. So students understanding how they can get from point A to point B in terms of satisfying their intent with the college. The quality of online instruction is excellent. Instructional materials are appropriate for program content. I'm aware of whom to contact for questions about programs and services. I think that's certainly something where anecdotally we've all heard, students, having a tough time knowing exactly who to contact and when. And then a couple of custom items round out our challenges. The college provides the support that I need to be successful, and an advisor helped me to develop an academic plan. And so what we're going to do with these is to take these and really crunch the numbers and dig into the data more deeply to figure out where we can pull on some threads and get some of the information out of the feedback that we were provided by students, pass those things on to the relevant stakeholder groups, and help them to chart a course for maybe some improvement or some prioritization of these items in the future. A few of these things, similar to our strengths, are things that we've seen represented on previous institutional challenges in historical iterations of the PSOL data that we've received. And so these, again, will be things that we continue to focus on as a college and continue to move forward and hope to influence in survey results to come. So I mentioned one of the key benefits for administering this survey and this framework is that in partnering with Ruffalo Noel Levitz, many other community colleges and universities are also administering this tool. And so then we have the ability to look at our results in comparison to other institutions and make some determinations about where our strengths and challenges fall in relation to those other campuses. And so what you're seeing on this slide here is just a selection of some of our strengths and challenges and how they align to the national benchmark, which is indicated with that horizontal kind of like golden dashed line. So the 4 items that are above that dashed line, billing and payment procedures are convenient, tuition paid is a worthwhile investment, faculty provide timely feedback, and students' assignments are clearly defined in the syllabus. Those are things that we are ranking above our peer comparison group. And you can see there by the star designation that 3 of those items are things that were also institutional strengths of ours. So those are things that we know to be really strong for our students. Our students are happy and satisfied with those things, and we tend to outperform our peers in those areas. Under that national benchmark line are items like my program advisor is accessible by telephone and email. I'm aware of whom to contact for questions about programs and services, and registration for online courses is convenient. There's some irony here with the registration for online courses is convenient because although this was an institutional strength of ours, we did fall below the national benchmark in terms of student satisfaction overall. And so that's certainly something that we might want to take into consideration. Obviously, with the way that our college registration and admissions process works, our hands are a little bit tied in terms of falling under the umbrella of the district office, but that might be something where, we look at and figure out how we can adapt or change some practices there to make sure that students have the appropriate guidance and information that they need to be successful in that space. This next slide helps us to understand what factors are influencing our students to enroll. So we talked about one of the use cases for this data is looking at recruitment and retention efforts, and I think this information certainly helps to shore up, what students are looking for and what things are driving them to enroll at Rio. So things that we know to be true about Rio is that we're flexible, we're affordable. We have a variety of options, including tons of academic programs and areas of interest, as well as the ability for students to kind of jump into courses outside of the traditional academic calendar. I think a lot of those things are reflected in this data that we're seeing here. So items like flexible pacing and convenience, cost, ability to transfer credits, future employment opportunities, reputation, employer recommendations. These are all reasons why students are being driven to Rio and reasons that we're attracting students. And so these are things that I think will be certainly helpful and insightful for our marketing team to help to continue to do the good work that they're doing and generating all those leads for the college and getting more and more students to come to campus. So in addition to all of the satisfaction and importance items that students are asked to rate, students are also presented with three kind of global items in this survey. And so this is the first one that we're looking at here. So students are asked just kind of outright, how satisfied are you with your experience at the college? And so what you're seeing here, the gray bar represents the response, the percent of students who were satisfied back in 2019, the last time that we administered this survey. The middle blue bar there, the 78% is for this current version, the 2022 data. And then the yellow or green bar are the student national comparison groups. And so you can see that our scores dropped a little bit from 2019 to 2022 in terms of overall satisfaction, and we are trailing a bit behind our peers in terms of satisfaction nationally. A similar trend is also true with the question of how likely are you to re-enroll with the college. And so the drop from 2019 to 22 was a little bit smaller here, and we're closer to our peer comparison group overall. But this is certainly something that we want to continue to focus on. We know that as a result of the pandemic and other challenges and competition that we face, that our enrollments aren't where we want them to be compared to where we were historically. We've seen some decline in our enrollments, and that was certainly accelerated as a result of COVID-19 and all of the disruption that ensued. Um, and so getting students to re-enroll and the ability to retain students and keep them moving forward in their programs and keep that momentum on chart is certainly something that's going to be important to the college moving forward as we continue to adapt to the new realities of the market and how we're serving students. And then finally, students are asked, overall, how well did the college meet your expectations? And so in this space, I think we're performing very much in line with where we're wanting to be. Although we did drop 1% from our 2019 results, we're very much still right in line with where we were back in 2019, as well as with our peer group. And so this is something that is going to be another area of focus, and we'll be able to have data more consistently moving forward as we continue to roll out this survey every 2 years. And so we'll be looking at this again in the future as we get that next round of data in 2024. So what are we going to do with this information? What are the next steps for us in using this information to help to improve things around the college, help to make sure that folks are aware of the feedback that we're receiving from students, and ultimately put this data into use? So this is a bit dated because this slide deck was constructed a little while ago, and so we're just getting around to sharing it with everyone campus-wide. But we have conducted a qualitative analysis. So new for this year, we had access to student open-ended survey responses. So there were questions asking students to just provide some general feedback and some comments about how the college is doing and how well we're meeting their expectations. So we culled through all that data, we themed it out, we looked at kind of the sentiment of some of the comments and some of the themes and trends that we were noticing in the feedback that we were getting from students. And we were able to take that and parse that out and pass it off to the relevant stakeholder groups so that we could work with those groups to try and identify any potential training or intervention options that we might have in working with that data and identifying, both opportunities to highlight positive performance and opportunities to maybe make some improvements and some growth. I know that, for instance, we sent a bucket of data off to the advising team that both included kind of kudos for advisors as well as, some opportunities for outreach or some feedback directly from students. And similarly, we passed off some data to the faculty group around issues like we saw reference with grade times and quality of feedback and things like that. And so um, Dr. Perez and the faculty chairs are working with that data to help to refine some of the information that's coming out of that and put that into practice. We have created and published a report, so that's available on our IR employee portal site. We've also got this slide deck as well as some entries in our most recent fall 2022 IR newsletter. So I would encourage you, if you haven't had a chance already, to take a peek at that. The slides that I showed you today were just a very high level overview, but there's a ton of detail available in the written report. You can see responses in terms of importance and satisfaction scores for all the items that students are asked to rate in the survey, both for the current year as well as previous years of administration. So you can kind of see how items are trending, where our performance gaps were this year compared to where they were in previous years, and how well we're making some improvements on those items as time goes on. So be on the lookout for all of that information. I'll also be posting the recording of this session on our IR YouTube channel and posting it on our upcoming newsletters. But without further ado, if there's any questions, I think that's kind of all the content that I've got crafted for today. And I appreciate everybody's time and interest in today's session.